Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lighthouse Sessions. Today, I have my new friend Scott Woods with me, and Scott is a subconscious performance specialist. And yes, we're going to dive into that. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name's Scott Lester Woods. I'm someone who is fascinated by both psychology and business, and just really how the two intertwine together. I've been doing this around about 11 years. I was fascinated at first by watching people. I think he started to come more onto the scene the last couple of years in the US and Canada. I don't know if you're familiar with Darren Brown at all. That name
Yes.
ring a
Yep.
bell? So I
Yep.
was fascinated by him when I was younger, sort of understanding the way that the mind plays tricks on us, and I was also fascinated with things like ambition, personal growth, all of those pieces, and so that naturally led me to business. And slowly but surely over time, I really now work with normally entrepreneurs who are between the sort of the 6 to 8 figure mark, who find themselves wanting to explore more, and yet they keep coming across this internal friction, and they're trying to use almost, if you like, conscious technology to try and change what is a subconscious problem. And so I just help them really upgrade their operating software at the level where the problem's really residing. And it's weird, it's wonderful, but most of all, it's good fun.
Well, I'm going to share a weird insight, and then we're going to have some weird discussions and have a little fun.
Sure.
I, for years, had mentors that said, everything in your life you manifest it, you create it, good or bad, it's you. And I took offense to that, because when you're struggling, that's all you want to hear is somehow it's your fault. But then when I finally did some inner work, I realized if I accept that the guy in the mirror looking back at me is the source of all my problems, that also means he's the source of all my solutions. To me, that was very freeing. So I'm sure that's part of what you're doing. But how does somebody recognize? I'm going to ask a strange question. Let me come at a different way. The problem with the phrase internal conflict is, to somebody who doesn't know what internal conflict is, it just feels like inner talk. Is that fair?
Yes, there'll normally be a sensation that comes with that self-talk, though. So I can give you a prime example. If there is
Yes.
someone listening to this, you've got one of your visionary founders, and they're thinking about what they want the next 12 months to look like in their business. And let's say they're stuck at, let's go with the arbitrary 10K per month. It's the classic thing that's been thrown around generally. So they're at 10K per month and they want to get to 100K per month. And I said, if you're driving at the moment, pull over at the side and just say to yourself, but in the next 12 months, I'm going to scale to 100K per month. And I want you to say that with as much certainty as you can, so that it fills every fiber of your being. People will say that. And some of them will go, yeah, I absolutely believe that. Some people could say that out loud. And there's just this other little voice that hijacks and goes, yeah, I mean, that'd be nice, but, and then suddenly there can be a cascade of excuses. Or there could just be a feeling of discomfort because a part of you feels like you're lying to yourself. That there is internal conflict.
I love that. And for what it's worth, I'm on the autism spectrum. So I'm very, very literal. And when somebody tells me something fantastic, I immediately go, I don't believe you. There's an inner cynic that I'm working on taming. But I think for me, it was just recognizing that inner critic was one option and not the only option.
Yeah. It's so true. So, as part of my story, I spent just the better part of around about 2 years living in a Buddhist temple, and it wasn't sadly one of the romantic ones that you get in the films at the top of a mountain in the Himalayas. It was one in the UK, but it was a wonderful experience. And there was a time where the car at the time I had, it was just terrible. And it kept breaking down. And I remember sort of going back, and one of the main monks, known as the Sangha, there kept saying, Scott, this is like the third time you've taken your car in over the last month. What's wrong with that? So, well, I've had to replace the tires this time. And so he started doing this little experiment with me. And he said, okay, that's interesting. So they had to replace the tires, but didn't a pigeon fly into the windshield like the week before? So it's a different windshield. I said, yeah. He said, so what happens if they then painted it a different color? Will it still be your car? And if you then change the seats, will it still be your car? And then slowly he kept playing with this idea to the point of, at what point is it your car? or not. And what you realized is that there wasn't really a my car. There was just different parts that could be interchangeable that gave the illusion that there was this car that was there. And it turns out humans are the same. When you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you think you're seeing one person. You're not. You're seeing a community of you, different parts, different ideas. Every single cell in your body is different to what it was 7 or 8 years ago, apart from some cells, I think, in one of your left molars in your teeth. But generally, you are this ever-changing flux of ideas, and generally the brain needs an identity to hold on to just to like remain sane, if that makes sense.
One of my past guests had the best theory for this, and I'm going to share it with you. He believes that we're all here playing a game. We are infinite beings, and part of it was we agreed to play this game. We get turns, there's rules, but to make this game valuable, we had to experience deep emotions like joy and suffering and everything in between. And part of it is recognizing, we suffer because we feel disconnected from the source. But he said this is all a game. And when you think about it, we've chosen to play this game. And when we run out this clock, we go back to being our infinite selves. And I was like, I can't prove that, but I don't want to. I think it's a great approach to life, is to see it as a game.
Yeah, there is actually a book called The Game. I believe it's called The Game, and there's a few different parts, and it is very much these people who decide to go into the simulation called EARTH, and it stands for something at the time. And people go through this simulation, and the idea is that everyone in the real world is about 18, and they go through and they play the game to like almost simulate different life experiences, so that when they come out of the game, they've been able to live many lives over and over again to be able to learn from it. And so again, whether it's true or not, who knows, but what a great philosophy to live by when you realize you're just playing a game.
Well, the funny thing is, I'm fascinated by Scott Adams, the creator of the Dilbert cartoons, and he passed away recently. And his final week or something, he posted on his social media, and he said, after a lot of debate, I realized I've spent most of my life, I can't remember if he was atheist or agnostic, but most of his life he was non-religious. And he said, I just realized as I'm nearing the end, there's zero downside to believing there is a God, and amazing upside. And he said, worst case, I was wrong and I go into the darkness, whatever. But just imagine coming into the final week of his life, he embraced the bigger picture because he thought, what do I have to lose?
Yeah. And that leads on to a really interesting idea, right? That not all beliefs are equal, not in the conventional sense, but different beliefs have different levels of weight to them, right? So if someone were to come and see me, they could say that I don't believe that there's water in this glass. Well, that's one belief that's going to maybe dictate some actions. But whether or not you believe there's a God or not, or whether or not you believe that you're here to do something or not, whether or not you believe you're just a random collection of ideas, those beliefs really high up in the idea of how you construct your own reality, there's going to be a large trickle-down effect. And so there's this general sense that there's a belief hierarchy, and the higher up the hierarchy you go of the belief that you want to change, the more that's going to change every other aspect of your life, which is why you might see someone who used to be a member of Hell's Angels, they go to prison, they become a born-again Christian. It's like, well, what changes in their life? Absolutely everything, because the level of the belief that changed, that's what occurred, the big trickle-down effect, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, I'm obsessed with identity. I think a lot of people, and again, I went through a lot of coaching to learn how to do things, and I would do them, and then I didn't get the results I was hoping for. But the reality was I never once stopped to upgrade the identity. So, I had the actions, but not the belief in the actions or the power of it. So let's talk about mindset for a minute, because I think that's you're doing something more than mindset, which is clearly fascinating to me. What does mindset mean to you? And then let's talk about conscious versus subconscious, because I'm fascinated that the subconscious is literally the regulator for how well we live our lives. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, so one of my favorite statements for the subconscious is whether or not you believe in free will or manifestation. One of my favorite quotes was actually by it was a hypnotist years ago called Milton Erickson. He was known as there we go, you're nodding your head there.
The hypnotist, yeah.
Exactly. And he would say that people don't realize it doesn't matter if free will is a thing or not. Your life is unconsciously determined, right? So it is the operating software beneath the hood that basically decides what it is that you're going to think about, what it is that you're going to feel, and what actions are you going to take. And so if you're trying to make a change at a conscious level, it's like gaining full control over an ant that's maybe walking in one direction, but the problem is that it's walking on top of an elephant that's walking the other way. So we want to make sure that when you're making changes at a subconscious level, because that's where real change occurs.
I love that ant analogy, because I think I'm fascinated, and I see weird things in patterns in nature. And being Canadian, one of the things that fascinates me is how much energy we as humans put into snow. And what I mean by that is, we are arrogant enough to say, I want to ski, so therefore we're going to make snow on that mountain. Okay, now I want to drive. I don't want snow on the roads. So in our city, there's always this, you got the graders out, and then you got the snow removal. And it's like there's a lot of activity that literally accomplishes nothing. Because once spring hits, it was all for naught. I mean, and I'm not saying, we should stop moving snow, but it's just, when you look at a time, whether it's today, tomorrow, whatever, everything seems important. But if you look at it over a season, again, some of that activity becomes pointless, and some of it could have been spent elsewhere. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. I think when people generally want to make a change in any area of their life, there's only ever sort of three things that are going to be the primary dictator of that. And one, which I'm sure your listeners are going to be very familiar with, is clarity. It's like how clear do we have the vision in our mind as to what we want to be able to do. The second one, though, that are not enough people to speak about is energy. If someone is, Lord forbid, going through chemotherapy, and I swan into the hospital ward and say, right, you said last week that you wanted to start building $1 billion business. It's the idea of the things that they have to change and the energy required to make that change. It's just not going to be feasible in that low energy state. And so there's energy. And then the third one is subconscious blocks. And so that energy, people don't think about the neurological cost of change, right? When you spoke a moment ago so beautifully about identity, identity isn't just this psychological thing. There is an energetic cost to changing an energy at an identity level, right? That the brain literally has to degrade energy towards old neural pathways to make new ones. And it's like the brain already takes around about 20% of our energy anyway, even though it's only 2% of our body weight. So the moment that we're asking it to do even more, because the last thing your brain wants you to do, by the way, is move or change. So when we're asking it to go through a change, you're right. You could be spending all your time using energy in one area, but if you're going to want to make a change, you need to be at a high energetic state to allow that change to take place.
Well, it's funny. I'm reading a book on manifestation right now. I think it's called Beyond Wanting, and I can't remember. I think it's Matt Cook or something like that. And it's fascinating because he talks about our energy level and the energy level of the universe. If we align that vibration, we get out of our own way, and the universe delivers. Whereas if there's a disconnect and we're focused on what we lack, as much as we want something, it's always forever out of reach.
So when it comes to manifestation, I have a weird, when I was speaking about friction earlier, I have a weird friction reaction to that. And the only reason for that, honestly, Jeff, was when I was living in the Buddhist temple. I went straight deep. I was never a Buddhist by any means, but I wanted to learn about meditation. So I'm a big believer in total immersion. So you go there and you learn with the best, right? And,
as one does.
Well, I went straight, head dive straight into the deep end of the spirituality pool, whether it was ayahuasca with shamans, climbing mountains in my pants with Wim Hof, the Iceman, all those pieces. But I found that when it came to manifesting my dream life, I would wake up every morning, and it was the first thing I would do. I'd go to the meditation room in the Buddhist temple. I would sit there and I'd get myself into what I believed was, I'd open up my heart and get myself in alignment with the universe, and I'd feel amazing. And then I'd leave, and then the manager of the temple would say, "Oh, by the way, Scott, you haven't paid rent this month," because I was broke as anything. And I think, "Oh, this abundance thing, what a load of rubbish." And there's been times where I wasn't feeling abundant, I wasn't feeling in alignment with the universe, and I was making significantly more money doing that. And I realized that it wasn't necessarily about alignment with the universe, it was more alignment with my own congruent actions. If someone was sitting like a fly on the wall, would they have been able to look at my actions over the last week and said, this person is clearly congruent that they want X, Y, Z? And that's a great question to ask, by the way. If you're listening to this right now, if someone were to just watch you for the last week, how serious would they think you were about your goals? Right? And they're probably not going to look at your seriousness in terms of how much you're spending getting into alignment with the right energies of the universe. They're probably going to look at some tangible actions, right? So I have a love-hate relationship with that word manifestation.
Well, and I think the big thing, and I'll help you align it, because the reality is it is about alignment. Whatever we're aligning has to be aligned. If it doesn't align, and again, I shun people who, want to say, well, you weren't going to succeed because Mercury's in retrograde. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So no, I'm not going to bother wasting energy on aligning with Mercury. But I think the word I want to pull out of there is congruence, because if no matter what we do, and, I'll give you an example so that you can pull it apart or maybe learn from it. But I've taken many a sales training course, and one of the things is I know all of the sales methodology, the sales skills, but I reject any of them that require that I be manipulative or scheming in any way. And no matter how simple the techniques are, I will fail at that every time, because first of all, I'm not going to keep showing up and doing it. Is that fair?
I'd say that's very fair. There's also another piece there, which is the moment you're attempting to take an action that's out of alignment with a deep embedded value that you have, that there is friction, right? Your body language will change, your tonality, your breathing will be off, and that will also come across in the way that you're attempting to present yourself. So I'd say that there is a very tangible, real reason why the moment that someone's trying to teach you a sales technique that doesn't match your values, of course it's not going to work.
And the funny thing is, I could do it perfectly in training, but the minute I would try to do it in live settings, I was like, this is wrong. It's manipulative. And by the way, when something aligns, you just do it and it works. And my funny thing was, when I used to do sales calls, I actually didn't hold on to the outcome. My intention coming into a sales call was have a chat with Scott. If we're fit to work together, let's find out how we can work together. And I spent like 5 years learning how to do sales better, only to come back to doing what was natural and aligned with what I believe.
Yeah. And there's obviously many, many different ways to be able to train a sales team. I've done the same in the past, where I've worked with different companies and helped with their sales teams. And some will go so militantly down the route of just say every word exactly like this and do it over and over again until it's just hardwired into your central nervous system. I personally think I can see why that would work, because as a training system, it's almost like the military. It's we can kind of take most people who aren't necessarily very good and just train them into becoming these almost like these robotic assassins for us. The way that I prefer, which is not only a lot quicker, it's a lot easier, and I think probably moves a lot more in alignment with both of our values, is if you just double check, does someone feel like they absolutely believe this product, program, service would help the other person? And if they only believe it 50% or 70%, they're just not going to be able to do as well as if they genuinely believe it 100%. And so what are the things that's stopping them from believing it 100%? Because the moment that you say, right, your only job is to work out whether or not this program can help this person. Well, then the moment you do know that it can help that person, all you need to do is transfer your own emotions to them, which becomes a very incredibly easy thing to do as a person, right? So I absolutely prefer the route that you're talking about, because then your job isn't to sell anyone. You already know the product's going to be better for them. You just need to work out if that's actually going to be the case first. And so you're not trying to manipulate, you're trying to research and learn, and which changes the entire dynamic, right? So I'm a huge fan of the process that you just used.
Well, it's funny, Scott, because one of my early mentors told me that sales is the highest form of service you can offer another human. And I was intrigued by that. I didn't understand it at the time. And then I went through all these other trainings and I went, this isn't of service. Like, it was funny that fundamental belief early on helped me reject a lot of training. And coming back to sales, just as a side note, I was taught how to overcome every possible objection, and I could never understand why I'd want to wait till somebody objected to something. And I always thought, as a salesperson, it was my job to understand if this is a fit, yes or no. And if it's not a fit, send them somewhere else. Of course, corporate entities with, well, we paid for these leads, you got to harvest them. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Nobody sleeps at night knowing you harvested something from someone.
Yeah, the language can be a very, very powerful thing. The way I always like to frame it in my mind is at that point, the moment it's overcoming objections, and this is only if you've been able to establish whether or not it's a good fit, right? That absolutely has to be foundational, otherwise the rest just crumbles, especially long term. Is a lot of people think that objections are you versus them in that scenario, and it's just not. It's you and them versus their fear, right? It's completely different spin on it. And I think the moment that that's the case, the moment that you can both even establish consciously that that's the case, when someone says, I'd love to, I've just got this weird deep belief about borrowing money to pay for other things, and that feels really weird, but I really want to. Well, now it's like, okay, well, now this isn't me versus you. It was never me versus you. It's me and you against your fear. How do we work together as a team to conquer that? And I think when people can feel that as well, it just changes the dynamic completely.
I love that approach, because I think that's the other sales tip I always got was sales is the transfer of energy and belief. And again, if it's you and me versus your fear, I'm an ally, not some sneaky enemy to be contained. Now let's talk about your work with subconscious versus conscious, because I meet a lot of really, really smart people who live up here, and they believe that their entire existence is what they experience between their ears. What would you say to that comment? Because I'm starting to understand that this is, the brain uses a lot of our energy, but unless we're fully aligned and we understand that subconscious, the conscious doesn't really carry us.
That's right. So almost that analogy that I used earlier, another one that I love for conscious and subconscious is your conscious mind is like a passenger on a bus, right? And every single day this bus could get to the end of the road and it turns left. And you know that if that bus turned right, you'd get home 15 minutes faster. Many different people use tools to try and change the direction of the bus, but as a passenger. Right. And what we want to be able to do is just be able to speak directly to the bus driver to say, by the way, I know that the only reason you were going left is because you were trained to go left because you thought it was the fastest way. Turns out it's not. Those roadblocks that you used to think were on the right, they've gone. Like we can turn right. The moment that the bus driver understands, oh, the roadblocks aren't there, I can go. You really can go. Like people, I've been doing this 11, almost 12 years now, and people are always surprised by just how quickly those things can change. I'd say that the biggest indicator that I alluded to earlier, when it comes to making changes consciously, subconsciously, what the difference is if you think about your goal, or if you think about the actions that you know you need to take to achieve your big, audacious goal, if there's just a part of you that goes, ugh, and there's that weird feeling that occurs, it sounds very over the top to say this, but that feeling, that friction is the reason you're not there yet. That's literally the thing that's standing between you and that big goal, because that's the thing that's going to find an excuse to hinder those actions. And so what a lot of people do is maybe they got from point A to point B in their business and they did it purely through hardcore logic, and maybe they weren't even feeling huge amounts of friction throughout that first phase from A to B. From B to C, though, they feel like they've just been banging their head against the wall and they don't know why. It's because maybe there's just this big, deep subconscious block that they don't know how to overcome, and they've been trying to think their way out of it. And I think it might be an Einstein quote, although I think there's a lot of quotes that become him and Abraham Lincoln and Mark Twain for some reason. Everything that was ever any bit of wisdom came from those three guys. The same level of thinking that got us into the problem isn't the same level of thinking that's going to get us out, right? And so very often it's that part, it's that weird little thing that seems like a tiny niggle, but that niggle in the body, in the mind, that's making you feel uncomfortable with the next action, that is the thing that's stopping you from scaling. That is the $64 million bottleneck.
I just got chills because first of all, I agree with you that wisdom comes from a few key ones, and Einstein is one of my favorites. But I'm going to be very literal and figurative with your quote, because if you think about it, I've seen businesses of all levels, and one of my friends is a coach and who says, new levels, new devils. And I think the aha moment, when you think about a startup company, it is sheer grind. You can, most people who have the idea, they can grind, they can get their little project up and running, they can build that small starter business, and it's all mental power. And it's literally, you're using all of the tools of the flesh. You've got the willpower, you've got the inspiration, you've got motivation, but you don't get to that next level until you learn it's not about you, it's about the bigger picture. And I've got some chills thinking about that, because I think a lot of people are, there's that myth of the self-made man or self-made woman. I don't know anybody who's had any success in life who didn't have a village behind them in some respects. So I'm fascinated by the conscious and subconscious, because I think initial success can be easily won with conscious thinking, but it's also fleeting because you haven't actually won the subconscious battle. Is that crazy? Or
I'd say you know what's really fascinating is all of that, I'd say, is spot on, but there is another level, and that's that's the superconscious level. Have you ever heard of the superconscious before?
I have, but I want to hear your definition, because I think that'll help the listeners.
Sure. So the idea, and again, there's lots of different people describe the superconscious in lots of different ways. And if people say, I know exactly what the superconscious is, my immediate thought is, well, you're probably lying about other things too. Right. So when I'm using the term superconscious, I'm using this as the absolute innate intelligence within your mind and body. And I'll give you a very quick example. When you have a newborn fertilized embryo, and it's splitting off into 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16. And by the third trimester of a pregnant woman, those cells are replicating at 250,000 cells a second. The fascinating thing that no doctor can answer, and I'm certainly not going to be able to answer on this podcast, is even though they were all identical cells, why is it that one of these cells knew to become part of the baby's head, and this cell over here knew to become part of a baby's foot? Now, there are some people who are going to be screaming, going, well, clearly it's source, right? It's source, it's God, it's the higher self. And there's some people who are going to be saying that's absolute BS. It's going to be just internal code within those cells. My answer, I don't have a bloody clue, but I don't really care. All I know is that there is this innate intelligence that knows what harmony and coherence is for you. And this innate intelligence knows that far better than I can as your coach, far better than you can as the surface level conscious passenger on this massive bus that you're driving. And so the truth is, I'm never actually upgrading someone's operating software, because the limitations that are stopping them from going from B to C, they weren't born with. They had to learn through time. And all I'm doing is I'm speaking to that innate intelligence, and I'm asking it to recalibrate and recode in the safest, fastest, and most effective way for you as an individual. And what it does very, very quickly, and I still don't know exactly how it works. We've done a couple of brain scans, and the before and after brain scans are mind-boggling, but I can't tell you the mechanism because I just don't know, at least not at this stage, is that the mind can move itself back into coherence. And the really exciting piece is that it's not like I ripped those limiting beliefs away from you. It's not like I removed your old identity and gave you a new one. All I did was help you remember who you were without the limitations. Right. And that's the coolest part. The part isn't just, oh wow, I'm able to dissolve this limitation and get this upgraded belief. It's more remembering, oh, this limiting belief was just BS to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Because we help you remember who you were before the limiting belief. That's all. It's incredibly transformational, but at the same time, incredibly underwhelming.
I love that. And for what it's worth, one of my early mentors, he called it rebooting a computer, because we accumulate garbage and bad code and things, and we need to reboot. And I think you've explained it perfectly, because when people ask me, I say, right now that's above my pay grade. I don't need to know how it works. I just know that certain things work. And, again, I will go back to Sir Isaac Newton. I can't actually physically see gravity, but I know it's there. And whether I believe in it or not doesn't matter. So I might as well believe in it because it's just easier.
Yeah. Or even I don't know how gravity works. And scientists don't know how gravity works, but it doesn't mean that I can't build a plane. It doesn't mean I can't utilize this. It doesn't mean I can't throw a ball and have an idea kind of where it will land. So we know the phenomenon exists and we can play with it. We just don't know exactly how that works, but that's okay.
I'm absolutely fascinated because there's so many parts of the human existence. We study the laws of physics to make sure our planes are more airworthy. We look at, all kinds of math and calculations. And yet the single most important thing, in my opinion, is our subconscious, conscious, superconscious, the connection. And it's fascinating how ancient philosophers, like I love studying the ancient philosophers, they knew stuff. And you being in the monastery, by the way, I'm jealous, because I'm like, okay, how do I convince my wife I'm going to go off and live? And by the way, I'm going full on mountain, head shaved,
Do it. Go big or go home.
But I'm like, I don't know that my wife would want that. But having said that, it's amazing how in the ancient times, they had a lot of time to ponder what they observed. And, I'm going to borrow your phrase, because I think they trusted in knowing that we know what we need to do. It's only in the last, since we invented agriculture, did we start to think we were better than the environment and separate from it. And I think love agriculture. I'm a big fan of access to food. But when we lost touch with the land and the food we made, we lost touch with a part of ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. There's actually a book that I wrote 2018. So when was that? Okay, so looking around about 8 years ago. And I'm not even going to talk about it in detail because it's a rubbish book in hindsight. Rubbish book. But the whole premise was that it was the idea that most suffering nowadays is being caused by these evolutionary mismatches, which is quite a popular idea nowadays, but 8 years ago there weren't that many people talking about it. But I found that if someone was in a bit of a funk or someone felt like they're out of coherence, it's because they weren't acting like the hunter-gatherer nomad that their genes had programmed them to be for the first 95% of our existence, right? The agricultural revolution is something that is very, very recent in terms of any kind of human evolution. And so, the experiment that I'd always say to people whenever I did talks as well is if you took a chimpanzee or a bonobo, bear in mind we're equally related to a chimpanzee or bonobo, more so than an African elephant is to an Indian elephant. But if you take one of those and take them out of the jungle, away from their tribe, shine blue lights in their eyes, give them ultra-processed food, stop them from moving, do you think they're going to start thriving? Right?
Not likely.
Exactly. Most people instinctively know that's not the case. And so it's like, well, what happens when you stop trying to be human? It's like, it's not not a lot of great things, right? And so I still think that we're trying to find our spaces, especially with AI, which is a whole other conversation, of course, where we're these hunter-gatherer animals that have access to godlike technology, and we still haven't really found our footing, still using quite medieval rules to work together, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of issues that can be solved by allowing those evolutionary mismatches to be removed.
I love that. Now, Scott, you and I could talk about this for hours, and we will. I think there's going to be a follow-up conversation. For those listening who are drawn to what you're talking about and they want to learn more about you and your role with the subconscious performance specialist, where can people go to connect with you, learn more about what you do, and maybe find out ways to collaborate?
Yeah, sure. So the best way really nowadays is to just go onto my website, scottlesterwoods.com. So if you're someone who's maybe heard this, recognized that there is some internal friction that's going on there, and you think, gosh, who could I be if these old limiting stories were no longer available to me? Then there's just an easy application. Just fill out. I'd love to chat. I'd love to learn more, see where you're at, because you'd be surprised who you could be the moment that those limitations that were never yours finally bugger off, which is a very English phrase.
I will allow it.
Yeah.
Good news is it translates, so I don't need to get too deep in it.
Yes.
It fascinates me. One of my friends and mentors, he talks about the acorn seed. It doesn't need to be told what to do. It just knows. And I'm fascinated that we think we know better than this infinite, and I'm going to say infinite wisdom. I don't care what you want to call it, whether it's God, universe, whatever. There's a magic in all that is around us because it's bigger than what we can see and believe. So
yeah, I'll finish with this if it's helpful, Jeff. When we did the brain scans and basically saw the before and after, and it was the whole process took about 15 minutes. I said it was the technical director of the Brainworks Clinic in London. I really wanted to say, this is clearly a high performance state that we're generating, whatever that actually means. And so I said to the director, is this a high performance state? And he said, I would say that this is the brain's ideal state. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, all you're really doing is helping people see reality for what it is without the baggage of the past. And because we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers, we're not, we know where our next meal is generally going to come from. The moment that you have a brain that can remember what the situation actually is without the baggage of the past, it is ideal, because you can always make better decisions when you're acting off of what is, as opposed to attempting to make a decision with all the baggage of the past. And so the idea is that you don't need to learn anything new, you just need to unlearn. And the brain can do that pretty rapidly.
I love it. Well, Scott, I want to thank you very much for hanging out with me, sharing your insights. You and I were meant to meet. We're clearly well aligned. So thank you very much, Scott.
No, thank you ever so much for having me.